fear tonight after what was the largest workplace immigration raid in a single state in U.S. history.
ICE agents surrounding food processing plants in Mississippi, arresting 680 people.
Agents targeted 7 food processing plants in 6 central Mississippi cities.
Children coming home after their first day back at school, learning one of their parents was among the hundreds detained.
I know that when something like this happens and it's all over the news, you can't avoid it in the wake of it. It's really easy to be on one side or another. But I think it's really important for us as the church to remember that behind every news story that you've seen, behind everything that you may have read on social media, or every conversation that you've had about this ICE raid, there are real people who are really affected. Their lives have been turned upside down in an unimaginable way. There are kids who will forever be afraid that whenever they come home from school that mom and dad aren't going to be there. And there are a lot of people in this community who worry about where their next meal is going to come from as a result of this. Honestly, at first, never imagined that it would be a long-lasting thing. Everyone kind of thought that people would be released and we would go on about our normal lives. But as legal help started coming in and we realized that most court dates aren't until about February, basically for 6 months from the raid, that we were going to be looking at having to provide long-term help of rent, utility bills, and food were the major needs, along with legal assistance, counseling, and just community care. So whenever the raid immediately happened, it was so beautiful to see so many people bringing in donations. I mean, we had more food. I thought it would last forever. I never imagined that there would be a day when we would run out of food. And the last few weeks, we've been running out of food. We've been worried, are we gonna have enough maseca? Are we gonna have enough vegetable oil or sugar to put in the boxes? It's crazy that we've gone through so much food so fast, but whenever you're feeding a community, an entire community every week, it takes a lot of food. This isn't over, and it's not going to be over anytime soon. February is a long time away. It's a long time to have to worry about your food is going to come from a food pantry. It's a long time to worry about your loved ones being away. I know that it can be really difficult to not say, well, this side should have done this or this side should have done that. But I just hope that we as the body of Christ can remember that these are real people. These are real people's lives, and this really matters. How we respond to an event like this really matters as the church.
In the last session, we talked about the Good Samaritan and struggled through the question, who is my neighbor? When we listen to that story well, we hear that neighbor transcends any of the boundaries that we tend to put in place, whether it's geography or religion or ethnicity. Being a neighbor means that we are willing to encounter anyone and to love them. But what we know is that even though it's easy to say, I want to be a neighbor, we all have barriers, things that hold us back from truly entering into the lives of other people. And one of those great barriers that stands between us and others is fear. Fear of who they are, fear of what they represent, fear maybe of how they might challenge who we are or what we represent. Crossing cultural differences is difficult. And what I've seen over the last few years, and probably what you've experienced over the last few years, is that fear has been growing among humans. And it's pushing us apart, sometimes in dangerous and difficult ways. Several months ago, I was speaking at an event, and after one of the sessions, a woman came up to me, and she shared that her granddaughter, a Christian, was dating a man who wasn't a Christian. He was a man of a different religion, and in fact, he was also from a different country. He was a foreigner. And she was very worried about their relationship. They'd been dating for several years. She was worried that they were going to get married and that this difference in religion would somehow hinder their life together. As I listened and began to ask some questions, I realized that really the issue for this woman was fear. She was terrified that her granddaughter might convert to the other religion, terrified that this man would take his granddaughter to a foreign nation at some point in time during their marriage. So I asked her, have you talked to him about any of this? And she looked at me as if I'd gone crazy. And she said, well, my granddaughter tells me that she's talked to him. And I asked her, but have you talked to him? And she just shrugged her shoulders and walked away. The fear for her, the terror for her between her and this unknown person was simply too much. And in many ways, it was driving not just her and this young man apart, it was driving a wedge between her and her granddaughter. And I think that's what fear does to all of us. It drives a wedge in between us and others that we're called to love, and maybe a wedge even between those that we claim to love already. So let's think for a second about fear. What drives fear? Fear is driven by the unknown. When we don't understand someone, when we don't understand where they're coming from, when we don't know what they believe or how that might impact us, that's when the fear rises in us. And think for a second, how does fear really come out between us and others? Here's what typically happens when we're scared of someone, when we are afraid of encountering someone. That typically comes out as defensiveness or anger. We push back. We take stands about what we believe. We try to define ourselves in opposition to this other person who is so different from us. But here's what we learn as followers of Jesus Christ, that our relationships in this world and in this life, not just with those who are easy to love, but those who are difficult to love, our relationships are not to be defined by fear. The book of 1 John was written late in the first century after Christians had been gathering for decades. And this is what John wrote to those Christians who were experiencing people from lots of different cultures inside the church and outside the church. In 1 John chapter 4, he says, "Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as Jesus is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." Perfect love casts out fear. But what love is this that casts out fear? That's what John answers right after that. He says, "We love because God has first loved us. Those who say, 'I love God,' and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen." We love because God first loves us. Here's what I think he's trying to tell us, that when we encounter those people that are different from us, that challenge us, that somehow raise up fear in us, that the answer, the antidote to that is not us dredging up the most love or the most courage that we have, but us remembering and acknowledging the love of God at work in us. It's the love of God that enables us to love others, to reach across the boundaries, to overcome our fear. When one of my daughters was young and she was learning to walk, she found that it was easy to walk inside. She could cruise across the carpeted floors of our living room. But she loved to go outside. But what she quickly discovered is that among the weeds and the sticks and the roots and the holes and the little ridges in our backyard, that she spent a lot of the time stumbling and falling. But she knew that if she would reach up and take hold of my hand or her mom's hand or another adult's hand, then she could walk comfortably. She needed help and assistance. And I think what we forget too often in this world where so much of our encounter with other people is driven with fear, we forget that we have help and assistance in the love of God. So here's what I would challenge you to do. When you encounter someone that you're not sure if you can love them, you're not sure if you want to really engage them in any way, or maybe if you realize that you're scared somehow of them, you're being defensive or angry with them, here's what you do. Simply pray. Pray for strength and wisdom. Pray that the love of God might be evident in you. Read 1 John chapter 4 again and again. Remember that perfect love, the love of God living in you, inhabiting you, casts out that fear. Another strategy thing you might do is simply gather with friends. If you know there's an encounter, there's a conversation you need to have, if there's somebody in your world that you really want to cross the barrier with, gather a couple of your Christian friends, share your fears, share your concerns, and let them pray for you, that the love of God might inhabit your conversations with them. In your group, talk a little bit about the power fear has in your relationships and in your encounters with others. And then maybe share sometimes when the love of God has compelled you through that fear to talk with someone. Talk about how that changed you. Maybe talk about how that encounter healed you or brought you to new life.